Hello friends, welcome to our Subject webcast. In this video tutorial, we are going to see how to install Active Directory, DNS and DHCP to create a domain controller, and then we will see how we can join a client computer to Active Directory domain. And for this demonstration, I have one Windows Server 2016 installed and configured virtual machine. As you can see, the computer name of our Windows Server 2016 is WS 2016. And before installing Active Directory domain service, DNS and DHCP, the TCP/IP protocol needs to be configured with a static IP address, and that's why we have assigned the IP address 192.168.49.5 to this Windows Server 2016 computer. So in the first step, let's install the Active Directory domain service, DNS and DHCP server role on this server. Let's click on Manage, select Add Roles and Features. On Before You Begin screen, click on Next. Select role-based or feature-based installation and then click on Next. So select the server on which you are planning to install all these roles. In our case, we have only one server, and that is WS 2016. Let's select that server and then click on Next. On Select Server Role screen, we have to select Active Directory Domain Services. So let's select this checkbox. It will ask you to add features that are required for Active Directory Domain Service. That will also include management tools as well. Let's click on Add Feature to add that features. Let's select DHCP. Let's click on Add Feature again. And let's select DNS server role as well. Let's click on Add Features again. Now let's click on Next. Leave the default settings and then click on Next. Click on Next. Next again. Click on Next. And click on Install to start the installation process. Once the installation of DNS, DHCP and Active Directory roles is complete, you will get a notification to promote the server to a domain controller, as well as there is one more notification to complete DHCP configuration. First, we will promote the server as a domain controller, and then after, we will complete the DHCP configuration. So let's click on Promote this server to a domain controller. This will bring up Active Directory Domain Service Configuration Wizard, and on that wizard, we have to select Add a New Forest, because we are going to create a new Active Directory forest with Windows Server 2016. Let's specify the name of our root domain. In my case, that is mylab.local. Let's click on Next. On this screen, we can select the forest and domain function level. I will keep it to default, and then in a domain controller's capability, it's by default selected DNS server and global catalog, as it's the first domain controller in our Active Directory forest. Then after, we need to specify the directory service restore mode password. So let's specify the password and then click on Next to continue. In the next screen, it will give you a warning about DNS delegation, but it can be ignored. Let's click on Next to continue. Verify the NetBIOS name assigned to this domain and change it if it is necessary. We are going with the default NetBIOS name, and that is mylab in our case. Let's click on Next. On this screen, we can specify the location of Active Directory database, log files and sysvol folder. By default, Active Directory database and log files are stored under C Windows NTDS folder, and sysvol will store under C Windows sysvol folder. Right now, we are not going to change this path, just leave it to default and then click on Next. Now review your selection, and when you are ready, click on Next to continue. Now wizard will run system check and verify system is compatible with the selected installation or not. If it's pass any critical error, those need to be addressed before the installation begins. Once all checks pass successfully, we can start the installation. So let's click on Install to start the installation process. We need to wait till it finishes the installation process. Once it's complete, the server will automatically reboot. Once the server is rebooted, it will be promoted as a domain controller, and upon restart, you should be able to log in using your domain credential for the user administrator. After reboot, log into domain controller as domain administrator. Let's specify the password and then press enter. After logging to DC as an administrator, our first step is to verify the Active Directory domain controller. Let's click on Tools, select Active Directory Users and Computers. On Active Directory Users and Computers container, expand your domain and then click on domain controllers container. Here you can see we have one DC for our domain mylab.local and the DC name is WS2016. Before we start the DHCP configuration, let's complete the DNS configuration by creating a reverse lookup zone on our current DNS server. So let's minimize this console and let's click on Tools again and select DNS. On DNS MMC, expand your server name, expand for lookup zone. Here we can see two automatically created Active Directory integrated primary DNS zone, and that are _msdcs.mylab.local and mylab.local. Let's create new reverse lookup zone. Let's click on reverse lookup zone, right click on it and select new zone. Click on next on welcome wizard. We will select primary zone and we want to store this information in Active Directory because we want to create this reverse lookup zone as an Active Directory integrated zone. Let's click on next. Now we have to configure Active Directory zone replication scope, and the by default option selected is to all DNS servers running on domain controllers in this domain mylab.local, and this option is by default selected to prevent us from too much network traffic because of DNS replication. We do not replicate the zone over the complete forest, we will only replicate this zone in our local mylab.local domain. Let's click on next. We have to select the IP version that will be handled by this reverse lookup zone. Select IP version 4 and then click on next. Here we type in the network ID or name. This is basically in most cases the first 3 octet of the address. So let's specify 192.168.49. You can see how it fills in the IP in reverse order in the gray out space over here. Let's click on next. Now you have to set dynamic update for DNS entries. In a pure Windows Server Active Directory with the DNS environment, you should select allow only secure dynamic updates, and that is recommended for Active Directory. So we are not going to change anything on this screen. Let's click on next. Now you get a short summary and then you can create the zone by clicking on finish. So let's click on finish. Now here we have one reverse lookup zone for our DNS server. When we click our newly created reverse lookup zone, here we can see we have 2 default entry for start of authority and name server. So let's add one pointer entry for our domain controller. Let's right click on a free space and select new pointer. You can manually add the host IP and FQDN to create pointer record, but we will browse the host record manually. So let's click on browse. Let's double click on WS2016. Let's double click on for lookup zone. Let's double click on mylab.local and select WS2016 host record from our forward lookup zone. Let's click on OK. Now here you can see the host IP address is 192.168.49.5 and that is mapping with FQDN WS2016.mylab.local. Let's click on OK. Let's click on reverse lookup zone again, and here we can see we have one pointer record for our Active Directory domain controller. Now let's open network connection console. So right click on start button and select network connections. Select your Ethernet adapter, right click on it and select properties. Let's select Internet Protocol version 4 and then click on properties. Now here you can see our preferred DNS server's IP address is 127.0.0.1, that is pointing to local server itself. Let's manually change this IP address to 192.168.49.5 because we have installed and configured DNS server on this local server and we want to use the local server's IP address as a preferred DNS server. Let's click on OK. Let's click on close and let's click on close to close this console as well. Now we are fully ready for our next step to configure DHCP server. So let's do it. On a server manager screen, click on yellow exclamation mark. We have already installed DHCP server role on this DC, but DHCP post installation configuration task is pending. And here we can see post deployment configuration task pending for our DHCP server. Let's click on complete DHCP configuration to start the wizard. Read DHCP post installation configuration wizard description. As you can see, it will create 2 security groups for DNS server administration delegation. First one is DHCP administrators and second one is DHCP users. This will also authorize this DHCP server in Active Directory environment. Let's click on Next. Now this user credential will use to authorize this DHCP server in Active Directory environment. The credential you choose should have domain admin rights, because the DHCP server will update DNS and Active Directory domain service entries directly after allocating IP address to DHCP client. So here I leave it default because the administrator has sufficient privilege to do so. Let's click on Commit, and here we go. As you can see, creating security groups done, and authorizing the DHCP server in Active Directory is also done. Let's click on Close to close this console. So now we have successfully completed DHCP post installation configuration task. Now let's create one DHCP scope for our DHCP server. So let's click on Tools and select DHCP. This will open DHCP Management MMC. Expand your server name, expand IP version 4, right click on IP version 4 and select New Scope. Click on Next on the New Scope wizard page. In the scope name, define the name of your DHCP scope and write any description about the DHCP scope. So let's specify the name Scope 1, and then let's click on Next. Now you have to select the IP range and the subnet that will be managed by your DHCP server. Enter the start IP and an IP address. In our case, I'm going to specify 192.168.49.22, 192.168.49.250. Leave the length as the default /24 and then click on Next. On the screen, type the IP address range that you want to exclude from the DHCP scope. If I'm not going to add any IP address, let's click on Next. On this page, enter desired lease duration for assigned IPs or leave as default 8 days. Lease duration is the specific time duration till that client can use an IP address assigned by DHCP from this DHCP scope. By default is set to 8 days. Let's change to 8 hours. Let's click on Next. Select Yes, I want to configure these options now. To configure DHCP options right now. You can also configure this later on by selecting No, I will configure these options later. But we want to configure right now, that's why we will select Yes. And then click on Next. If you have router in your network, type the router's IP address and then click on Add button. In our case, that is 192.168.49.1. That is the IP address of our gateway. Let's click on Add and then let's click on Next. The default parent domain should be populated by default because the local server is configured as a domain controller itself. And that's why you can see here our parent domain name is populated to mylab.local and already DNS server's address is added. And that is 192.168.49.5. Let's click on Next. Specify your Win server if you have any or leave it to empty and then click on Next. Select Yes to activate the scope immediately or No if you choose to activate DHCP scope later. Once you activate the DHCP scope, then after your DHCP server is able to assign IP address list to DHCP client from this DHCP scope. We will select Yes, I want to activate this DHCP scope now, and then let's click on Next. On completion, click on Finish to complete the new scope wizard. Now here we can see we have a one DHCP scope named Scope 1. And if you click on Address Pool, we can see the start IP range 192.168.49.20 and that will end on 192.168.49.250. To test our DHCP server, I have one Windows 10 client PC on the same network segment as our Windows Server 2016 DHCP server. Let's open Network Connection console. Right click on Start button and select Network Connections. Now already this client is set to obtain IP address automatically from DHCP server. But for this demo, I disable the network adapter. First, let's check the IP version 4 properties. Right click on your Ethernet adapter and select Properties. Select Internet Protocol version 4 and then click on Properties. Now as you can see, this computer is set to obtain an IP address automatically, as well as is set to obtain DNS server address automatically from DHCP server. Let's click on OK. Let's click on close. And let's enable the Ethernet adapter on this computer. As you can see, we get an IP address from our DHCP server. Let's click on No and let's click on Close to close this console. Let's open command prompt. And at the command prompt, I'm going to type command ipconfig/all. And here you can see IP version 4 address is 192.168.49.20. The default subnet mask will be 255.255.0. Default gateway's address is 192.168.49.1 and our DHCP server's address is 192.168.49.5, the same as our DNS server address. Let's go back to our Windows Server 2016 computer and on DHCP Management Console, expand your scope and then click on Address List. Here we can see we have a one client and the client's IP address is 192.168.49.20 that is assigned by our DHCP server. Client name is ws10-cli01.mylab.local and this is the MAC address of that client computer. Let's verify on that. The last 4 digits are 7050. And as you can see the physical address, here we can see 7050. Once our Windows client gets an IP address from our DHCP server, now we are ready to join this client to our Active Directory domain. So let's do this. Let's close this command prompt and let's click on Start button, then click on Settings. Click on System and then click on About. From About page, you can change the Windows 10 machine name by clicking on Rename PC. You can also join this PC to Azure Active Directory as well. To join your organization's domain, click on Join a Domain button. Once you click on Join a Domain button, it will ask you to specify the domain name. And in our case, that is MyLab. Let's click on Next. It will ask you to enter your domain account information to verify that you have a sufficient privilege to join this Windows 10 computer to your Active Directory domain. Let's specify the credential of our administrator to join this computer to our Active Directory domain. Let's click on OK. Wait while your computer is authenticated on the domain. New feature is one extra step where you can put the name of the person who will be using this PC by defining the account type either as a standard or advanced user. Click on Skip to skip this step. And then you will need to restart this Windows 10 computer to complete the process. Let's click on Restart Now. Now let's move to our Windows Server 2016 domain controller. Let's open Active Directory Users and Computer Snapping and then click on Computers Container. Here we can see we have a one computer account named ws10-cli01 and that is our newly joined Windows 10 client PC's computer account. Now let's create one user account to log in on our newly joined client PC. Let's click on Users Container and select New User Object. Specify the username user1. Specify the login name user1 at mylab.local or pre-Windows 2000 style name mylab/user1. Click on Next. Let's specify the password and I want to clear this checkbox. User must change password at next logon. Let's click on Next. Let's click on Finish to finish this user creation wizard. Now here we have our one user account named user1 and with the help of this user account we'll be logged in on our newly joined Windows 10 client computer. Let's move to Windows 10 client computer. And now click on Other Users and here we have to specify the name of our user account. Let's specify user1 and this will sign into MyLab domain. Let's specify the password and then press enter. Now we have successfully logged into our Windows 10 client computer with the help of Active Directory user account user1. That's all for this video demonstration. Hope you like this video and don't forget to share this video with your friends if you find this video helpful. Thank you for watching this video. See you next time.